Equestrapology here again, and today I'm here with my sister.
Salutations.
And we are going to be talking about the other two sisters, Celestia and Luna. After the premiere of Season 4, we were both really excited to see that Luna and Celestia were featured a lot more heavily, both on an emotional level and in the flashbacks during the Alicorn potion scenes. So we had started talking about that, and we decided that we were getting in-depth enough with this to bring it to you guys, and to have this discussion where you could hear it. Additionally, my video analyzing the dresses in the Grand Galloping Gala is not done yet, still, so I felt really bad about not putting up anything for such a long time, so this is a very low-key video. We're just going to be talking about it, but it's something to be there for you guys because I know how dearly you must miss me. So, to start it off, we're just gonna start with the very basics of what made Luna turn into Nightmare Moon. You've had some theories about that, didn't you?
Well, I mean, they talk about it in the show when they say that, you know, she was jealous and that no one was paying attention to her. And so it's like a matter of when you're the younger sibling, which I wouldn't know because I'm the older sibling.
Yeah.
And you do live forever in someone else's shadow. And I think that's sort of an interesting figurative pun almost, the living in the shadow of your older sister, being the night pony. And since darkness is traditionally associated with, you know, like the dark side of the Force, jealousy, anger, passion, you know,
danger,
strong feelings, whereas, you know, light is traditionally associated with the light side of the Force, which is like self-control and like
happiness,
meditation.
protection.
It's not even happiness, it's like being content. And, like, you know, just not making a lot of waves. There's something that's like this order versus chaos motif.
Which is very prominent in My Little Pony.
Definitely.
I mean, everything centers around harmony versus chaos.
Literally. So it's suitable, and if we associate, like, the mastering one's emotions in contrast to being mastered by one's emotions, the Luna and Celestia re-arc, it's not even an on-screen arc, it's just sort of an assumption, reflects that. And I do think it's cool that she's, like, motivated by jealousy and anger, and this is, like, her, you know, the dark side of being in the limelight.
The My Little Pony comic books also specify that there was something up, spoiler alert guys, that there was the Nightmare Forces, and those contributed, and that is actually, personally, I think shown in the flashback, Princess Twilight Sparkle, when you see that black fuzzy stuff around her after she, like, freaks out.
In the middle of her magical girl transformation, she's like, you know, inside the cloud of darkness, she's probably doing that thing where they, like, zoom over the light traveling down your arms, and you, like, and there's, like, a crown, and you, like, fly up, and you change, and, like, there's music playing in the background, and the gloves appear.
But we only see it from the outside. The point I was trying to make was, is that black cloud that we see around her appears to be the Nightmare Forces, which are things that transformed her into Nightmare Moon. And when you hear her talk afterwards, she sounds disassociated from Luna. And if you don't know about the Nightmare Forces, it's just one of those, like, artistic license type things. But when you do know about it, it's actually the Nightmare Forces are, like, screwing up her head. So, it's not just Luna, like, she has all of these things, and then the Nightmare Forces find these things, and they, like, dig into it, and that's what really makes her transform. She had all of these feelings beforehand, but the extraterrestrial crazies
latch onto it.
Actually caused her to transform.
And that's a really interesting use of sort of it's almost a science fiction archetype, where, like, a foreign power latches onto your personal weakness and, like, carves out a hole in you. It's actually an anime trope that's pretty common. You do see it sort of in some Magical Girl series, and I remember seeing it in Inuyasha, where there was this one arc where they were, like, trying to get Kagome to turn against Inuyasha, and they were looking for a dark place in her soul to latch on, but of course, she's the protagonist.
She's perfect.
So she doesn't have one. But it is a common trope, and I think it speaks to people. I'd also like to point out that since the sisters are sort of physical goddesses, I mean, they've been a little depowered now that we've seen the flashbacks of where they came from, what they're capable and not capable of doing. They're still basically physical goddesses.
They appear to be immortal.
Yeah, they don't age, they live forever unless you kill them, they raise the sun and moon, they qualify. So there's this theme in mythology about jealous gods and goddesses and the way that they take out their frustration on the world. And I think that in light of this, especially now that we've seen the flashbacks, there's something about Nightmare Moon / Luna's arc that really speaks to that ancient fear that if you don't give the gods their respect, they'll turn against you, and then they'll have to be sent away. It reminds me a lot of Near Eastern mythology, where
there's a lot of celestial bodies that play in Near Eastern mythology anyway.
Yes, and of course I'm studying Near Eastern mythology. My minor is in that whole area. I'm in classical mythology this semester, so I've sort of got a base of knowledge on which to draw, and that's immediately what Luna reminds me of. It's very cool.
So in Princess Twilight Sparkle, which is the lamest name for an episode ever, because it's one, confusing, and two, really boring, but in the flashback where Celestia and Luna are fighting, or Celestia and Nightmare Moon are fighting, a lot of people have been particularly bothered by how short it was, and, like, why it didn't take longer than that, because it was described as such an epic battle, but it was so short.
And you'll also notice that there were no witnesses to the battle. No one seemed to be in the castle besides Luna and Celestia, which I think could be explained if you went back and wrote the whole story, and I think there's a lot of potential. If you have that final battle being literally as it was shown on television, exactly as it happened, you get the impression that Celestia has been maybe, like, trying to figure something out, and this is the final confrontation when she realizes what's happening, and this is the answer to her mystery laid out in front of her, and it's horrifying, and while Twilight is on screen, like, having her moment of, oh my gosh, what's going on? You know, Celestia is there standing behind her, not making any noises, not drawing attention to herself. And I think that if we could spin the camera and look at Celestia during those moments, you would see this, like, moment of revelation and all the pieces falling into place, and if it was Celestia's story instead of Twilight's story, we would probably see flashbacks for super dramatic effect of her, all the pieces falling into place, and things you'd seen earlier in maybe an episode about all of this stuff.
And you had sort of come up with your own backstory for this, what you would write it as if you were to do it.
Yes, there's definitely a potential to have this be a, okay, so you start with a court drama. There's Celestia and Luna have been ruling for a while, things seem fairly peaceful. Suddenly, the people of Equestria start experiencing these strange nightmares, and no one can figure out where they're coming from, and Celestia talks to Luna and says, can you get to the bottom of this? And Luna goes, oh yeah, totally, I've got this covered, don't even worry about it. She just sort of hedges. So, but the nightmares continue, and Celestia gets, like, confused, and so she, like, goes on a mystery-solving sort of mini-quest, perhaps, in her own, consulting wise people, doing a little investigating, tracking down this and that, and so you get to the very end where she thinks she's figured out what it is, and she knows that the bad guy is hiding in the throne room right now, so she goes to confront them, and out steps Luna, and that would be your climax. That's where the battle fits in.
And that's where the intro, or that's where the flashback happens.
Exactly! And so it's actually a mystery-solving sort of plot instead of just a wham-bang, let me punch you in the face sort of plot.
And you could probably imagine that Celestia had had an inkling of a thought that maybe it had been Luna, but she'd, like, completely disregarded it immediately, because who wants to believe that their sister, the only person who's ever gonna be that close to them, is the one who's doing all of this?
It's a beautiful opportunity for emotional turmoil and, you know, suspecting the people you love, betrayal.
You could actually make this into an episode, since Twilight was reading Celestia's diary in Castlemania. You could have an episode of her reading it, and the episode is actually a flashback to discovering all of that, and it could be narrated by Celestia.
Oh, like when you have one of those Noir episodes where sometimes they, like, find the diary of some 1940s private eye, and then you start off with their narration and then jump into, like, their actual experiences and then fall back to their narration just before the commercial break.
And I mean, they've already brought up the emotional, like, resonance of this entire event for Celestia.
Which,
It's not like just jumping in randomly and suddenly giving a bunch of depth to something that's never been brought up before. Because in Princess Twilight Sparkle, in the first part, Celestia mentions how she used to hate the summer sun celebration.
Can you imagine how heartbreaking that must be? Everybody's so happy, they're having festivals, it's great.
They're, like, reveling in you, but the entire time, all you can think of is that their adoration for you is what made you lose your sister.
Ugh, it hurts.
Personally, okay, that's great, and I love that, but if that was not to happen, if that's gonna be completely disregarded, I think, personally, that the battle was abridged. They didn't have time to show the entire thing, so they didn't. It was just a quick part of it, and it's just like, maybe they'd even been fighting a bit before that, but as Celestia and Luna, and it had escalated.
Or she was fighting Nightmare Moon and didn't know who Nightmare Moon was. They don't actually have the same body type.
That is true. She has a really weird body type. But, I mean, the thing is just that it can be abridged. We have to understand artistic expression in this. It's not like we're watching a specific, like, documentary of these events. This is an artistic portrayal of it. So things can get bent a little bit and cut out for time and for artistic sake.
That's a Doyleist perspective, but the Watsonian perspective could also be that Twilight is not necessarily there back in time experiencing this. She may be tapping into a shared Alicorn Preter conscious.
Yeah, which, when she takes the potion, backing this up with observation, when she takes the potion, her eyes glow. The only other time her eyes have glown is when she's been in a hyper magic state, or when she's ascending to the astral plane where the Alicorns all go. So perhaps she's accessing a sort of shared consciousness.
It's like a Jungian thing, except instead of just archetypes and vague sensations, there's actually strong memories are kept there, magically. And so, if that was indeed the case, you could say that the memories kept in the Preterconscious were not 100% accurate to history. I mean, who remembers things exactly as they happened? So the memory may have abridged it for her, just by the nature of being a memory. In which case, that's a Watsonian perspective on why the battle was shorter in the episode than it would have been in history.
Then there's actually the battle itself,
which is excellent. The thing is that I've noticed is magic, when it's written by people who are not super into fantasy. My Little Pony is mostly written by slice of life type writers.
Or adventure-based writers.
So they don't really know how magic works. They haven't sat down and thought about it. Like, if you read the Dresden Files, you think about magic. You're like, oh yes, it's this system by which symbolic things are given actual power in the real world. Whereas My Little Pony writers tend to treat magic as sort of blunt force trauma.
Somehow does things. It's like beating you over with a bat that also does internal changes.
Right.
Besides bruising.
It is like Starfire star bolts. She throws them at people and they glow and they knock people over, but what are they made of? What are they for? How do they work? Why does she bother throwing them if they only ever knock people over? Magic is the same way. So at the very end, when the two sisters shoot laser beams basically at each other, that's all it really is like laser beams, and one of them's gonna knock the other out.
But the thing about laser beams is that they don't counteract each other like that.
And so, you can start thinking about this in terms of another very famous piece of fantasy work that is everywhere in the American consciousness.
And in British consciousness. And in the world consciousness.
World consciousness now, is Harry Potter. And if you've read the fourth book, you may recognize this concept of the two spells meeting in the middle and pushing back and forth on each other until good prevails.
When Harry and Voldemort had their little showdown.
And of course, their wands are brother wands. The two sisters are sisters. So you can kind of look at this as very similar stuff. You've got one spell that maybe we assume Nightmare Moon cast a killing spell, because it certainly looked like whatever she shot at Celestia earlier in the fight was supposed to kill her.
Mm-hmm.
That's certainly what Twilight assumed. So this shot she fires at the very end is a killing shot. Using the elements of harmony, Celestia fires a neutralization spell, which is like an
because that's what it does, is the elements of harmony bring things back to their harmonic level. It doesn't really make them good so much, except for the My Little Pony definition of good, which is harmony, but more just kind of evens it out and makes them not bad.
The elements of harmony can be viewed as an order-maintaining device, because the thing about any magical artifact is it has to have a specific purpose and a specific arena in which it can work its magic, and so it restores order. It averts entropy, it puts energy back into the system, it stabilizes. So, Celestia is using these things to stabilize her sister. And the two meet in the middle, and it's very much like the Expelliarmus versus Avada Kedavra. And we might even say that it could have been inspired by that, since Harry Potter is so popular and everybody knows it. But even if it's not, it's part of an archetype that's still meaningful. And so, in the end, the almost the weaker spell, the less harmful spell, triumphs over the fatal spell, and it throws Luna into the moon and banishes her without killing her, restores order on the planet inside the system by expelling the force of chaos from the system. Very interesting.
But that's the thing, though, is segueing, is that while Luna gets banished to the moon by the elements of harmony, when the main six fight her again with the exact same elements of harmony, she's reformed instead of banished. How come they could do one at one point and then something entirely different at another point?
And we have theorized that Celestia is using the elements of harmony all by herself. Of course, in every individual, there's, laughter, loyalty, honesty, so on and so forth. So it's not impossible for a single individual to utilize.
Especially when you have such a full understanding of friendship like Celestia does. I mean, she could already wield 3 of them just on her own.
Right, and she's very powerful, so she's got her own power augmented by the extra power. But she's still just one person, and so I think that elements of harmony are probably more effective when each power is given to an individual to be...
Yeah, and that would be a thing, is that since the main 6 each only have 1, but there's such an intense representation of it, instead of being, all of them and having to share spots in the person's,
they can really
spirit. They're like
focus.
supercharged by being this one explicit attachment.
They can really focus instead of having to split their efforts. Mm-hmm. And so I think that gives the elements more power. And I also think that the fact that they are using these elements on Luna in the absence of horrible emotional betrayal and trauma probably gives them more power, because these are positive elements. Mm-hmm. These are laughter. And it's very hard to use laughter effectively when you have just been, emotionally destroyed by your own sister, and now you're thinking you're gonna have to do something horrible to her.
Yeah. Well, she did do something horrible to her.
So...
that'd be like me banishing you to the moon for 1,000 years.
Let's not talk about that. I don't want to live on the moon.
To the moon! On the moon! That's another thing, is that a lot of people have asked the question, was Luna aware that she was on the moon when she was on the moon?
Great question. Was she in stasis? Was she wandering around on the physical face of the moon? And furthermore, the moon and the sun appear to be orbiting satellites for their planet.
Uh-huh. They're like the, heliocentric?
No, it would be, heliocentric means it circles the sun.
Mm.
So it would be like terracentric. I'm actually not sure about the term.
Yeah, there's some specific terminology, but I am not a science person.
But anyway, if those are orbiting satellites, then you've got a problem, because they're very small, and also you gotta wonder, what shape is the planet they're on? Is this like a Discworld type thing?
Oh, I hope it's Discworld.
It would be kind of cool if it was like Discworld. It would explain the small map, but if you put someone on this moon, and it's not the size of the real moon, it's not like a planet, for all we know, the sun and moon in these things might actually be flat discs too? We just don't know, and then her, like, face appears in the craters? How does that work? Did she, like, hit so hard that it knocked a bunch of potholes loose on the surface of the moon?
Oh god, that's horrifying.
I mean, that would hurt.
Yeah.
So, when she's in the moon, is she inside of the moon? Is it like a cage?
In the comic books, during the Nightmarity arc, they do indicate that she was, conscious, I think, but as Nightmare Moon, and since the Nightmare forces came from the moon, she kind of held dominion there.
Oh, she was comfortable then.
Somewhat.
So she would have been in sort of like almost a stasis because there was, this is her natural habitat.
A little bit, yeah. But that's the comic books, and it has been argued whether or not the comic books are truly a respectable source of continuity.
Well, I like them.
I like them too, and I think they provide a lot of good things. However, you know, they are not actually the show, so we have to wonder.
Personally, I think that there may be something to be said for, since Luna was a dream walker, it may be that she was in sort of a sleep stasis the entire 1,000 years, and she just sort of slipped out into people's dreams periodically.
Oh god, and that's how they got the nightmares. That's how they got the name Nightmare, for nightmares.
It's a good origin
story.
They
dreamed about her.
That would be a good explanation, especially if you don't go with my plan that, like, the thing she did before the final battle was, like, give people nightmares, which would explain where the name came from.
Because she is the Nightmare.
Yes.
She's the mare of the night, and thus when you have a nightmare,
you go, oh yeah, you remember, that's probably Nightmare Moon. We should talk about her in culture.
Explain.
Okay, so, like I said, there was nobody in the castle to view this final battle. And yet, in the Princess Twilight Sparkle episodes, Celestia mentions that the Summer Sun celebration is a celebration by the people of her defeat of Nightmare Moon. Now, I don't know if that's how it is now, because nobody really mentioned that in the first episode, although the first episode's a little wonky, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But if we say that at least that was how the celebration started, like when it was first put into place, that's what people were thinking about.
How did they talk Celestia into doing that? That's what I want to know, because she would have derived no joy from that celebration, which she says that she never has. But how did they, like, talk her into that?
She's a servant of the people, and I think she's very cognizant. She's like a veterinary type character, but nice. She knows what the people need, and they need to feel safe, and they need to be reminded that she's there for them, and they've been through a serious trauma, which brings me back to where I started, which is that since no one was there to see the battle, and yet Nightmare Moon is not only part of the instigation of the Summer Sun celebration, but also she's got her own holiday, Nightmare Night, which people do associate with someone called Nightmare Moon.
And yet no one remembered her in the first episode.
Well, we'll get back to that. So because of that, people had to have known that Nightmare Moon was out there and evil and scary and dangerous through some way that didn't have to do with the final battle.
Because there was literally no one there. Like, we didn't even see, like, servants or anything.
The whole place was evacuated, or the whole place had been put to sleep.
Like Sleeping Beauty style.
Like Sleeping Beauty style. So, if other people had to have known of her somehow, that's where my theory about her originally having tortured people's dreams for a while before Celestia figured out who it was, she would have become very, very well known because she's in your head and you don't know what's going on.
And you have to imagine that before that there was no such thing as a nightmare.
Quite possibly.
Because Luna took care of them.
Yeah, Luna was
like Scootaloo and that Sleepless in Ponyville, I think, the one where she had the nightmares and almost killed herself. You know, Luna stepped into that and stopped it from happening. So nightmares weren't really even a thing.
So not only is the one who's supposed to be protecting you at night not protecting you, she's also out there instigating nightmares.
But you wouldn't have recognized her because she looked so different.
Right, it's the same thing with Celestia. Maybe Celestia, like, went in to investigate and saw her in somebody's dreams and they had, like, a brief fight there. You know, there's lots lots of possibilities, but somehow Nightmare Moon had to have been interacting with the peasant folk, so to speak, prior to the final battle. And I would venture to say that since the first episode establishes that, like, hardly anybody at all remembers that there was another princess, and hardly anybody at all remembers that she's supposed to come back and all this stuff. But there's still these holidays, especially Nightmare Night, and in Castlemania, Applejack mentions that
the story about the leftover shadow of Nightmare Moon wandering the castle.
I would venture to say that over the 1,000 years, Nightmare Moon became a figure of folk myth and became dissociated from her original origins, and not many people remember that she was actually a Princess Luna. They just remember that there was a Nightmare Night, she was Nightmare Moon, and she was scary, and she did this, this, and this,
and dangerous.
And she was banished, and after she was banished, ooh, spooky, and so she becomes a figure of mythology, you know,
like how we treat, you know, Moses or any of the old Greek myths.